Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order. Finance New Orleans Board of Trustees 2021 retreat. Roll call. Board members. Chair Edgar Chase IV.
Present.
Vice Chair Andronika Morris. Secretary Treasurer G. Wade Wooten.
Present.
Board member Giselle Johnson Banks. Board member Charles H. Brown. Board member Stephen Smith. Board member Hunter Thomas.
For joining us for the retreat today. Before you is our board retreat agenda. Roll call was conducted. Are there any members of the public audience on here? Any introductions? Okay. Now we're going to hand the retreat agenda over, opening Jade Russell and Deidre Cummings, best practices. Unshare so you can share. Jade.
You're muted, Jade.
Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? Okay. I tried calling in from my phone because I've had a couple of bandwidth issues with Zoom today. So I tried calling in on my phone, but for some reason you couldn't hear me on my phone. So I will, I'll go ahead, let me know if you guys have any issues or if I start dragging out, just kind of let me know. One, thank you guys for the opportunity to present to the board, those who are here, and then for those who are not, I'm guessing that this will be made available to them just via the normal channel. So I so appreciate coming back. I think my assignment for today is to walk you through the bond and pilot process, just really a primer on that, as well as ethics and other best practices. Based on the agenda, I'm going to actually start at the bottom and work my way up because I always believe that it's really important for you all to understand how ethics applies in context with the role that you play as trustees of a FANO. So if you would allow me, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly. All right, does everybody see that screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So just really quickly, high level, I'm going to breeze through this. Naj has given me 20 minutes and she is a drill sergeant on time. So I'm going to stick with my time. Just very generally, pilots, and I think most of you who are online are familiar with this because you were here when this process was getting underway. But back in December of 2019, it's already been almost 2 years, which is amazing. The City Council adopted an ordinance which essentially gave us the green light to move forward with our pilot program. The general intent spirit of this ordinance was to incentivize development in areas that really need it, and to be able to leverage all of the tools in our toolbox to create affordable housing opportunities for the people of the city. The pilot benefits, the commerce effect, of course, getting projects, getting properties and developments back into commerce, which is really important. And then the second big component is jobs, the creation of quality jobs, both temporary jobs, permanent jobs as well. But again, our focus has been mostly on the commerce effect and the affordable housing benefits that are created by the program. As I told you a second ago, we want to be able to use all of the tools in the toolbox. The pilot program is just one tool in our toolbox, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the bond program, the bond financing program as well, which is yet another tool in our toolbox. But you also have tax credits, which the Louisiana Housing Corporation brings to the table for us. And we have that partnership, that CEA agreement that we have developed with them. And then thirdly, of course, we have the pilot program. Again, these are going to create jobs and have created jobs. As we've seen, we've closed already on 3. We have 3 more in the pipeline, actually 4 more in the pipeline that we plan to close out by year end or close to it. But it also, allows us to really start expanding the footprint of what FANO offers in terms of our programs and our incentives. It allows us to really wrap all of this stuff into something that makes a whole lot of sense for the city and the people of the city of New Orleans. This is just a little bit more about the pilot program and the incentives. Of course, how developers use it. They offset the loss in rental income that is created by offering below market units to families in need. And then it also simulates the affordable housing development market while generating a reasonable market-based financial benefit for taxpayers. Again, all good things. Pilots, I will say, are not the easiest thing to implement. And I shouldn't say implement, they're not that hard to implement, but the program, we've gotten past the hard part. It's very difficult to develop an effective pilot program. And I think we have definitely done that with the city's assistance. So this is just a quick graphic, if you will, of how pilots work. We've gone over this before, but I just wanted to refresh all of your memories on this. Of course, the project developer transfers title to the property to FANO. We take that via an active conveyance document. And then what we see then is that FANO leases that property back to the project developer. Again, as we've talked about before, FANO really takes ownership of the property in title only. The developer, through that lease agreement, really reassumes all of the operations, all of the taxes, all of the consents and approvals that are needed for the project. Those are given right back to the developer simultaneously with the act of sale. And then we, of course, then in turn remit our pilot payment, a portion of that to the city of New Orleans, minus our annual administrative fees, as well as any other closing fees that we have. And then that process it's kind of rinse and repeat for the duration of the pilot. In our pilot program, you can see pilots from anywhere from 10 to 15 years to 40 years, depending on the project, okay? Now, this is really, we have a couple of different buckets that we're dealing with with our pilot program. So we have a process in place for what we call mid-zone projects, those that are in the mandatory inclusionary zone. We also have a process that includes additional layers for the tax credits and bond financing. So this is just in a nutshell, the process. I know Kelly has been working very diligently on making sure that we can streamline this process as much as possible so that we balance both the amount of information that we offer up to board members and making sound decisions while also not making the process, overly burdensome or more burdensome than it needs to be. But this is the process that we have in place now. The eligibility screening, the application is then submitted by the developer that goes to the underwriting committee. It subsequently goes before the programs committee and the board. We have our initial approval, goes through public hearing, and then final approval by the board, and then we move forward with closing. All right. On the MIS side, it's very much on the front end. I'm sorry, on the MIS plus the bond and or tax credit side, it's very much the same process. with a couple of exceptions. So as we experienced our first project that had bond financing on it with the Christopher Holmes project, we know that there are some requirements that are mandated by law for our bond process. So we see some additional components, but here you'll see a very similar process. The exception though is that the developer also has to submit information and go through the underwriting process for LHC, which is a different underwriting process. Again, we're trying to perfect it where those underwriting processes can lay side by side with one another to make it less burdensome on developers and make it a seamless process. So we're working towards that. So you see the process here on this slide, and then you see step 5 is where the LHC process is highlighted. On the bond side, you have the Louisiana State Bond Commission, which has its own process as well, and own requirements that they have to comply with by law. And so we do have, I think we couldn't get better representation on the bond side than what we have. We have Wayne Nephew, who knows more about bonds probably than anybody in the state. So I think we're in great hands there. And of course, what we're trying to accomplish is to make sure, again, that the processes that come before the board are as streamlined as we possibly can get them. But very similar process where it comes before the programs committee, and then subsequently, once they've reviewed and signed off, it comes before the board for final approval. Now, with the bond process, of course, as you saw, we had to have those extra public hearings that are complied, and you roll those into the board meeting, the final approval board meeting, as you all consider that. Now that is separate and apart from the public hearing that we being FANO, that we have on the pilot only projects, which is not required by law, but we do think that it is something that we need to do because we are handling taxpayer dollars. We want to allow the public the opportunity to weigh in and comment on projects before the board considers final approval on tax incentives. So again, once we have those final approvals, we move forward with not only the closing of the bonds, but the closing of the bonds, but also on the closing of the pilot arrangement as well. All right. So I said a whole lot in a little bit of time because I don't want to exceed my time, but this is the full picture of the pilot process, right? And Wade, to your earlier point, I will make sure that this presentation is forwarded on to the board so you have it for future reference. But this is a snapshot of the full process. I think what we have is a process that not only, again, achieves the spirit and intent of the pilot ordinance that we entered into in December of 2019, but it also ensures that we're protecting the taxes of the general public, that we're making sure that we're using those for best use only, one of which is the creation of affordable housing and putting properties around those affordable housing developments back in commerce. So I will, I think that's the last slide here. I'll pause while I change over to the other presentation for any questions or comments or anything that you might have on the bond and pilot process. All right.
Hey, this is awesome. Thank you so much. We are going to blow your slides up and they will be hung in our office. So we look forward to you sharing this presentation with us, ma'am. Thank you so much. This is beautiful.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. You ready to go to the next thing? I think you're up at about 10 minutes.
Okay, so perfect. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time and really literally a little bit of time, because this is a big area, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time on ethics. And the reason that, let me make sure, can you guys see my screen? All right. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on ethics and really talk about why this topic is even of importance. Well, it's always important, but how it applies and why it's important to this board in the context of what you guys are currently dealing with in terms of the scope and magnitude of projects that you're working on. So prior to the launch of the pilot program, I would say, the trustees of this board, they could hear about ethics, it's very clear on what the boundaries are. But when you step into the lane of being a board that's positioned to approve tax incentives, a board that's in position to approve bond financing, you have to look even closer at the ethics rules and responsibilities that you carry as trustees of the board and how those rules apply to you. And so I really want to just cover today just a quick primer: who's affected, the basic provisions that stand out, namely gifts and things like that, gifts and entertainment, et cetera, compliance, and then best practices. And so I'll try to get through this really quickly. Again, it'll be made available to you. If you have any questions or concerns, you all always know that you can reach out to me. And then, of course, like I said, I'll make sure that it gets to you, the presentation gets to you after. All right, so I'm not going to belabor this slide a whole bunch, but really there are 4 goals of our ethics laws in Louisiana. One, it's to bolster public confidence. You all have a great responsibility, but the public should be comfortable and confident that you are executing your fiduciary duty in a responsible way. It also ensures that you all carry out the work that you do in an independent and impartial way. It's very important, especially in a city like New Orleans, that's a very parochial city, right? We all know we're like literally 2 degrees separated from one another. But the code is designed to ensure that your decisions are done in a way that is independent of your relationships and also impartial of your relationships. That there are proper channels, consistent channels, right? We always talk about with the team, the need to be consistent in how we apply things. And so that is why we have a pilot policy, and that's why we have other policies and procedures of the organization. So all of those are very important. And then last but not least, that your role as a trustee of this body would not be used for private gain. All right, who does it affect? It affects elected and I emphasize and underscore appointed officials. You are the trustees of this board. You are appointed officials. So you're not an elected official, but you are an appointed official, and that makes this code of ethics applicable to you. It also includes, for those staff that we have on the board, on the call today, it also affects public employees. Your immediate family members, we'll talk about that in a second. Legal entities, we'll talk about that as well, and private entities. Okay, who does it affect? You don't have to be you don't have to be employed by the governmental agency to be considered a public employee. For all intents purposes, the board of FANO, the trustees of this organization, are considered public employees for purposes of this code. All right, we already kind of went over this. Elected officials, it applies. These are just a couple of examples you can look at in your leisure. You'll see at the bottom, it covers public employees / servants, and that is where you fit in. Who does it affect? We talked about immediate family members. Who is that? Your immediate family members are your spouse, your parents, your children, your children's spouses, so your daughter-in-law or your son-in-law, the spouses of your parents, and I'm sorry, the parents of your spouse, I should say, your spouse's parents. You also have your siblings, and that includes half siblings, as well as your siblings' spouses, okay? Your spouse's siblings are not considered immediate family. That's a really important thing. We see that happening in Louisiana a lot. Your siblings' spouses, meaning your brother-in-law or your sister-in-law, they are your immediate family, but your husband or your wife's sister or brother are not considered immediate family, okay? Okay, so prohibited sources for elected officials, a person who has or is seeking a contractual business or financial relationship with the agency, or someone who for compensation attempts to influence any legislation or ordinance. The second bullet is usually what we consider to be someone who is a lobbyist, okay? Prohibited sources for elected officials and employees. Again, a person who's seeking a contract, someone who's seeking compensation, a person who conducts activities which are regulated by the Public Employees Agency, or a person who has substantial economic interest. Now, what does this mean when it says prohibited sources? All of the things that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes around gifts and entertainment and what's allowed, what's not allowed, what it's saying is you cannot receive these things from these prohibited sources. So the first question you have to think about is, who are you getting it from? And then the next question you have to ask yourself is, what are you getting, right? So before anyone offers or extends anything to you, you have to determine whether they're a prohibited source. And then subsequent to that, you have to determine whether what they're giving you or offering up to you is something that is excluded or included in the ethics code. All right, so gifts. These can get a little bit tricky, but what is a gift? Is something that has some economic value. Okay, a thing of economic value means money or anything that has economic value. So, for example, of course, we know that money, cash, has an economic value, but we also know that, for example, tickets, right, to an event, that has an economic value. But it could be something that's not as obvious as that, right? It could be, someone wants to give you a bouquet of flowers that has an economic value, right? And so you have to think about it that way. They include both tangible and intangibles. It could be something that they're promising to offer up to you, not now, but in the future, perhaps. All of those things are considered to be gifts. There is no minimum allowable value, despite what some people may say, oh, it's only worth $5. Oh, the flowers were only $25. That doesn't matter for purposes of gifts. There is no minimum allowable value. Bottom line, you're not supposed to accept any type of gift under the ethics code. You should note that there is no magic number. I just said that. Again, there are some exceptions, which we'll talk about, that could be perceived as gifts, but if they fall into one of the exceptions, they do not apply. And then also a discount. Maybe somebody says, I'm not going to give you anything, I'm just going to give you some money off of it. A discount is also considered to be a gift. Like I said, it's not always easy to determine what's a gift and what's not. And so we're going to go through a couple of the exceptions. Promotional items. If someone were to, pitch you for some business and they'll leave, some notepads and pens and pencils or even a ball cap or a t-shirt or something like that, provided that it has an imprinted logo on it and it doesn't have any resale value, then it would and could fit into one of the exceptions. Now, we've got to be, try to interpret these rules as conservatively as we can. Again, you have to use your best judgment, but generally speaking, if it is something that has a company's logo on it, then the fact that they have their logo on it generally means that you can't resell it, right? So now if it's something that's removable, right? So I gave this example in another presentation. If somebody rolls up with a car and they have their, their company logo on the side of it that you can easily take off, we're not talking about that, right? We're not talking about anything that's removable. We're typically speaking on promotional items. We're talking about things that are not high value items that may have your logo on it. Food and drink. Food and drink, of course, is something that has an economic value, but there are some exceptions to what you can take. And so if you are taking food or drink, you have to eat or drink that food in the presence of whoever is giving it. Okay, so in the everyday context, we know that we all go to games. For example, if you go to a Saints game and someone has a suite and there's food and drink there, that's actually allowable, provided that the person that is giving this to you is actually present with you or present in the general, premises, right? So you think about it the other way. Let's just say someone decided to just give you Saints tickets. Right? That's not the same thing, right? We're only talking about the actual food and drink that you consume. Gift cards and gift certificates for food or drink are not allowed. They're not exceptions to this rule. And the exception allows a public servant to receive reasonable transportation and entertainment, which is incidental to the food and drink. This is very important. All right. Limitations on food and drink. If you are going to consume food and drink with the person that's giving it, then it must be given. There's a limit to that, $60 per public servant per event. The dollar limitation does not include tax or gratuity. Okay, and this is for a single activity, occasion, reception, etc. So a single event. Again, the $60 limit is on the value of the food and drink only. It is not up to the public servant to keep track of the amount of food and drink they are consuming, so long as they are in the presence of the provider. It is, however, up to the provider to keep track of how much has been spent. So really, the person that is giving you the food or drink is responsible for keeping track of what they have given to you. All right, complimentary admission is you may not receive admission to a Saints game or to a Pelicans game. So just keep that in mind. A public servant under the supervision of an elected official may receive complimentary admission to assist the elected official if it is part of the public servant's ordinary job duties. So really what that's talking about is someone who might be, for example, a part of a body person or security detail or someone like that is an exception to the rule. All right. Also, one other thing I should mention, which is the first bullet, there is some exception to if you are getting complimentary admission, if it's part of a civic organization or a nonprofit, educational. You'll see a lot of times CLEs offered with some wraparound entertainment or a political event. All right, a little bit more on complimentary admission. Public servant may accept complimentary admission as well as reasonable lodging and transportation for educational and professional development, right? So that's what I just hit on. So that can be either an event, it can be a seminar, it can be a conference, but it has to be related to your job duties. So in this context, it would have to be related to the work or future work of FANO, provided that you are invited to attend by a sponsoring organization and the sponsor is not a prohibited source. So going back to what we talked about before, prohibited sources are people who are doing business with FANO. So you could not go on a trip with a company that's trying to do business or does business with FANO and do it under the guise that it fits into this exception.
Jay,
Yes, ma'am.
you're doing a wonderful presentation. In the interest of time, it's now time for Victor Chang to present.
Okay,
If you can send
okay,
this over, I know a lot of this is covered in the ethics training, which is required by all of us to complete
yeah,
by December 31st, the end of the year, 12 p.m. Midnight is the due date. And so what I would like to ask of you is if once we share this with the board, if there are any questions, can we do like a feedback, perhaps component on the November board meeting, just in case, and maybe folks can just email you directly?
yep, yep. I will give, if you give me 1 minute,
Yes, ma'am.
I'll wrap it up really quickly.
Sure.
And this is not a new presentation. I've given this presentation to the board. To Naja's point, you all have to do your required ethics training on an annual basis. This is not above and beyond anything that you could or should be learning there. But I will say this, in the context of the fact that you are now the approvers of pilots and bonds, you have to pay even more attention to ethics rules and be even more careful about where, what types of things you are engaging with by people who could be considered to be prohibited sources. Again, think about who it is and think about what they're giving and how it falls into the ethics code. And then lastly, I put up this slide. Every year, you're responsible for filing a financial disclosure. That is you affirming and affirming that you have not received any gifts or any of those things that are covered under the ethics code. You have to file that by May 15th of each year. It covers the previous calendar. And at the very bottom of this screen, you'll see tier 2.1 is the required filing for members of FANO. So again, to Naja's point, if you have any questions or concerns, I'm happy to address those outside of today's retreat. So thank you, Naj.
Jay's presentation. Thank you, Jay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. We can't wait to get your slides. Can everybody get 2 snaps just for good work, Jade? Thank you. So Jade's gonna send that to me. I will send it out to you guys if you have any questions. Like I said, we will double back with Jade just so that we can get clarity. Next up on the agenda, we are gonna have a market presentation from Victor Chiang, who is at K. Mitter and Associates Incorporated. Victor, are you on the line and ready?
I am. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Let me just share my screen. Okay, is that visible?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this is a market update, and I have also given this presentation before, but it's interesting to see macro trends, and so I'll run through this presentation, but please stop me at any time if you want to jump in with any questions. So the first chart on the top shows the yield on the 10-year US Treasury and the overnight Fed funds rates. And the closer the two lines are together, the flatter the yield curve. So in general, the flatter the yield curve and the higher the interest rates, the better for issuers to issue housing bonds. So, that's kind of where we were back in 2008 with high interest rates and a flat yield curve. Obviously, then the financial crisis hit in 2008, and we had a very steep yield curve that gradually started getting narrower or flatter and flatter as the Fed increased their Fed funds rates to 2019. Then COVID hit last year, and the markets were severely disrupted. Fed funds remains very, very low, and the 10-year US Treasury plummeted. But now, in general, long-term interest rates have been increasing due to inflationary demands or expectations. The bottom chart shows the same phenomenon, but in the tax-exempt bond market. The dark blue line is the yield on the 10-year MMD, and which stands for the Municipal Market Data, an index of highly rated municipal bonds with a 10-year maturity. And the light blue line is SIFMA, which is another muni index that tracks highly rated municipal bonds with 7-day municipal rates. So in spite of the steeper yield curve, the mortgage revenue bond or MRB market is still strong in terms of absolute rates. These three different lines represent different ways a housing issuer could issue bonds and their borrowing costs over the past 2 years. So the one to focus on for F&O would be the dark blue fixed rate line. So at pre-pandemic yields, a bond yield for F&O would be about a 185, which is right here. Then the pandemic hit, rates kind of went crazy, and actually in March there was a 2-week period where no housing bonds were issued, and then over the next month or two they began to stabilize. So they stabilized in 2020, actually decreased to lows early in 2021. And recently, over the past couple of months, they have been increasing again due to inflationary expectations. And currently, if F&O were to issue fixed rate bonds, it'd be about 2%, so about 15 basis points higher than where we were pre-pandemic, but still fairly low. This slide shows TBA pricing. So TBA stands for the to be announced market, and it's pricing for new mortgage-backed securities. It's an indication of the mortgage market in general, and it's the other way that HFAs can finance mortgages rather than issuing bonds. And this is currently F&O's single-family program. So this chart shows how Ginnie Mae MBSs have priced since the beginning of October in 2019. And you can see that back then, prices were, 101, 102, 103. But then during the pandemic, prices dramatically plunged and then shot up as the Fed committed to basically provide unlimited MBS support. And so the prices are inverse to yields. So the higher the price, the lower the yields, the lower the mortgage rates. So this was, the Fed trying to keep mortgage rates low and affordable to try to get people out of the dislocation that the pandemic caused. So prices shot way up, yields were low as the Fed really did heavy duty quantitative easing throughout the pandemic. And as you can see in 2021, as rates, the pricing has decreased in general, still stable, but over the last couple of months as the Fed, two things have been happening. One is the increased inflationary expectations, and two is the Fed has telegraphed and followed through on beginning their tapering. So they're going to reduce the amount of MBSs they currently purchase. Currently, they purchase about $40 billion in MBSs per month and $80 billion in US Treasuries per month. And that will decrease by about $5 billion in MBSs per month and $10 billion in Treasuries per month. So as that taper continues on, prices should, demand goes down, prices should go down, and mortgage rates should increase. This slide compares the borrowing costs in the MRB market against the private sector. And again, because prices have an inverse relationship with rates and yields, this is a translation of the TBA pricing from the last slide. So in the top chart, the borrowing cost for MRBs is in light gray, and the black line is the Freddie Mac mortgage rate and can be representative of the borrowing cost in the private sector. And the bottom chart shows the difference between the two lines. So the greater the difference, the more attractive MRBs are in general. You can see that pre-pandemic, pricing was north of 1%, and then it decreased. But currently, in general, 67 basis points is what the current difference is between those costs of funds. And so this slide will kind of separates out a little bit of the nuance. Now there's a lot going on, but basically each one of these graphs is a different mortgage product. So a single family government insured mortgage with no down payment assistance, conventional with no down payment assistance, government with down payment assistance, and conventional with down payment assistance. So the black line represents a generic mortgage revenue bond mortgage rate, and the orange line represents the mortgage rate if you were to sell your mortgage in the TBA market rather than with bonds. So you can see if the black line is higher than the orange line, then if you were to issue bonds and fund all of your mortgages would be government with no DPA, you would basically have mortgages at 328 or about 40 basis points higher than just selling them directly into the TBA market. So bonds wouldn't really work in this scenario or this scenario, which is even more dramatic in the conventional market. But as you get into down payment assistance loans, which basically all HFAs have down payment assistance loans, that's what they're financing these days. The bond market actually does look favorable to the TBA market on both the Ginnie side and the conventional side. Now, in order to do that, though, other things come into play besides just mortgage rate, such as volume and negative arbitrage, which we've discussed before. But we don't have to get into that right now. This slide shows the economics of issuing bonds. So, again, I think the one to focus, and these are all different types of bond structures. All these different colors are different bond structures, except the orange line is kind of what current TBA would look like. So each one of these columns over here is a different prepayment speed assumption. So 100% PSA, 200% PSA, 300% PSA, 400% PSA. That's basically a measure of how fast your mortgage pools would prepay. If you sell currently in the TBA market, you don't really care how fast the first mortgages prepay. Your income largely remains the same, but but your profit 3.2%, 3.7%, all the way up to 4% will increase slightly as mortgages prepay faster because you would be receiving payments from the second mortgage faster. So that's why that increases. If you issue bonds, the faster the mortgages prepay, the less time you're earning the spread between the mortgages and the bonds, and so your earning assets pay down faster, and that's why the income in general decreases as prepayment speed increases. So you can see that basically if you were to issue this dark line, issue bonds, you would expect your mortgages to pay between 100 and 200% PSA. So you could expect profits of around 5.5% versus the TBA market, which is around 3.3% or so. But again, that's once you have good steady clip of volume and bonds in and of themselves make sense to issue. But for now, while F&O is in the process of getting volume up and its green mortgage progress up, TBA still remains the way to go. But once, the overall takeaway here is that once you are in a position to issue bonds, then that ultimately should be more profitable than the TBA market. And this is evidenced here, just, showing the single family volume since 2013. And the dark green are the states in 2014 that issued single family bonds. And then here in 2021, you can see that many states are now issuing single family bonds. So volume kind of peaked, hit records in 2019, and 2020 volume was still almost at record levels despite, severe disruption due to COVID. And then in 2021, through June 30th of 2021, we're at 7.3 billion. And that was on pace to slightly outperform last year's volume. And so one comment here is that, you can see between 2017 and 2018, volume picked up and then, really spiked in 2019. And one interesting thing to note was that, and this is partially related to housing, but overall for tax exempt municipal bonds is that in the 2017, excuse me, in the 2017 tax legislation, tax exempt advanced refunding bonds were no longer allowed. And so that reduced the volume of tax exempt bonds being issued, which, because of supply and demand, led to lower yields in the municipal market, the tax exempt municipal market. So that was, getting rid of the ability to have advanced refunding bonds in 2017 benefited tax exempt issuers, and currently, there is no provision. There discussion has been raised several times as we work through the current bill, the legislation, Build Back Better, about bringing advanced refunding bonds back. Excuse me. About tax exempt advanced refunding bonds being allowed again. If that did happen, then you'd have a lot more volume, a significantly more amount of tax exempt volume, which would hurt interest rates in general. But the good news, at least for HFAs, is that that has been taken off the table again. Briefly on the multifamily side, each of these lines represent a different long-term multifamily financing and its associated costs. So similarly to the other interest rate trends, we saw severe disruption last year in March, April, prices stabilizing. And then in general, you can see that the teal line, which is a federal financing bank, cost has been increasing greatly. And then over the past few months, all of these costs have been increasing again due to inflationary expectations. This slide shows various short-term rates, 1 month LIBOR, SIFMA, and now the purple line is the 1 month SOFR fallback, which is the rate that will generally replace 1 month LIBOR once 1 month LIBOR goes away. One big development was from last year's that 1 month LIBOR was previously scheduled to go away in 2021, and now it's been pushed back to June of 2023. And this final slide shows the various investment rates for U.S. Treasuries and government agency securities, along with investment agreements. One big takeaway here is that, I guess two big takeaways. One is that, the dark green line here is basically how much yield you could get from investing from 1 year out to 30 years out. And when you compare this with rates in the past, rates are now higher. So that's a good sign. The other is that if you look here, U.S. Treasuries are actually, you actually could have some slight positive arbitrage on the front end of the yield curve. But the crossover point here around year 7 or 8 shows that, MRB rates are much higher than U.S. Treasury rates. So there still would be significant negative arbitrage depending on how long you issue your bonds. But in general, we're hopeful that as the market, as the Fed continues its tapering and support of mortgage rates in general, mortgage rates will increase, which helps HFAs, quote unquote compete, not really compete, but add value over the public marketplace. And then the Fed has signaled that after the MBS support and tapering is done, then they'll start increasing short-term rates. So next year, for example, the market is anticipating 3 increases to the Fed funds rates. So as that happens, the yield curve will flatten, which again is beneficial to HFAs because that will decrease negative arbitrage. So thank you. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Victor. This was a very, very good presentation. We would also like a copy of your presentation to share with board members in case they want to come back with any questions. Can we get 2 snaps for Victor's presentation, please? Thank you so much. We were expected to have Alex Craigie join us today with the Coalition for Green Capital, but he has some scheduling conflicts as he is up in the air right now, trying to get back home. Damon, do you want, what I did was I kind of consolidated all 3 times. Do you think we should take a break now or just keep rolling through your plan?
No, I think we can take a short break and then
Okay.
jump into the internal plan.
Okay, so guys, it's 1:59 now. Let's give everybody a 10-minute break. So I will see you at 2:10. Just make it easy, okay? Don't exit the screen, just pause yourself. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone, as we start the second session of our board retreat meeting. Next up, we are going to have a presentation from our Chief Executive Officer, Damon Burns. Damon, your presentation is here. Can y'all see it?
Yes.
Still see it?
No, it switched to the resilient plan.
Okay, hold on, let me fix it. I just need to move it over, that's all. Okay, see it?
Not yet. It's still showing the resilient New Orleans plan. There we go.
There we go. All right, you want to take us away now? Thank you.
Thank you, Nash. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time today. It's a lot of information that we're throwing at you, but this is all important and all relevant to the activities that we have today and where we want to go as an institution and the city. So what I am going to do today is do a refresher on the vision that we've been working on setting for the last few years. I'll talk through our goals and some of the adjustments and creations that we've embarked upon with our new business model. And then I'll also talk about some of our investment needs as it relates to realizing this vision. It's a very big vision. It's ambitious, but it can be done. And in order for it to be done, it's going to require a great deal of resources, particularly human resources, the people that are here every day, and then also financial resources in order to make the engine go. And then I'm going to turn it over to the team so that they can dig into the details of bringing this vision to life. So I'll be high level, and then we'll hear from each different area, and then also have a conversation about our financial projections going out over the next 10 years. So what does this vision look like financially, and what is the roadmap in order for us to accomplish our goals and become sustainable? Next slide, please. Next slide. As a reminder, we've been making investments in New Orleans since the 70s, since the late 70s. And that's represented as over $650 million that has been put into the local economy mainly through single family mortgage programs. We issue bonds and make mortgages to first-time home buyers and low to moderate income families. We've done a handful of multifamily and some economic development, but most of our activity has been in-house, single family. And you'll see in a few moments when we get into Byron's presentation, why this is still relevant and where we want to be moving forward. What kind of volume can we achieve? What can we expect out of this market versus the market that we were in during this time frame? But as you know, we encountered a number of challenges: Hurricane Katrina, the recession, the list goes on now with the pandemic. So we've had to make adjustments. Next slide. We've had to make adjustments to our business model, our overall approach. And as you know, we've been digging into different issues, particularly sea level rise, having the necessary infrastructure in order to live in New Orleans, the cost burden of renters, making sure that we have more affordable housing, more opportunity, and more economic opportunity to go along with that affordability. As an organization, we lost 95% of our assets in the aftermath of Katrina and a recession. So how do we recover from that financially so that we can sustainably offer investment to the community? Because without internal capital, we can't make that capital available to the community. And then looking at the sustainability of energy efficiency and all of the other different types of technological opportunities there are to upgrade our infrastructure, our communities, but also providing that upgraded infrastructure or giving distressed communities an opportunity to have those same beneficial and high quality investments in those neighborhoods, as well as the neighborhoods that can outright afford it. So it's a tall task, but these are the issues that we're focusing on daily. Next slide. And we've accomplished some things up to this point. So we've had some early success under this new business model. Activity really started picking up in December 2019 when we received a grant to study environmental impact bonds. We also received a grant to study or develop the Resilient New Orleans Finance Plan, and that work has come to a close. We also locked in that CEA with the City of New Orleans, which has allowed us to be more active in issuing bonds and pilots for affordable housing projects. We've joined the national network of green banks, other green banks that are out in the country, trying to build the same type of initiative in their communities so that they can address resiliency, sustainability, equity, economic development, all of the things that we want to do. We're working with a national network and getting great information and access and developing our own program. We closed our first deal not long after we got that CEA done with the city. So this program has been moving fast, and 7 projects based on the meeting we had a couple of weeks ago where the board approved 4 more deals. And then we also closed our first green mortgage. We've been working on building a green mortgage program for home buyers for a few years now, and we were able to get that program off the ground. There's still a long way to go. We have some ideas for scaling it, and we'll get into that later. Next slide. I mentioned the Resilient New Orleans Finance Plan that we developed with the C40 cities. It's a framework for us to mobilize public and private capital so that we can realize the benefits of sustainability. I mentioned before, it takes resources in order to make this vision come to life. So the Resilient New Orleans Finance Plan is a collective framework led by the city and Finance New Orleans and many other agencies. And of course, you approved this plan in May of this year, and we're now working on getting all of the other agencies officially on board. Their boards are going through the same process that you went through. We've had some disruptions because of Ida, because of the ongoing nature of the pandemic, but we've managed to keep everybody engaged. We had a meeting not long ago, so we're working on getting that final approval from every other agency and the city itself. Next slide. This slide just shows as a framework what is included in that Resilient New Orleans Finance Plan. It's about climate action, sustainability, economic development, creating social equity with our programs, and doing it through a few different lanes: renewable energy, green buildings, commercial and home, clean transportation. We've been working with RTA, the airport, on developing transportation infrastructure, water management, working with Sewage and Water Board. Our green mortgage program is an example of decentralized infrastructure, having the ability to, or giving homeowners the ability to invest in their own water infrastructure. That's an example. And nature-based solutions, everything from planting more trees to technologies that are dependent upon nature. These are all areas for us to invest in and create opportunity. Next slide. And we built our vision on that collective Resilient New Orleans plan, which is a resilient New Orleans with opportunity for all. Next slide. And we've adjusted our mission statement over the years to include climate resilience along with affordable housing and economic development, which has always been a part of our mission. Next slide. And you'll see in a minute how that mission statement is reflected through our business model. But we also created 4 10-year strategic goals. We want to use climate resilience to physically transform New Orleans, to create economic and education opportunities, build public wealth for community reinvestment and sustainability, and grow as an agile and innovative organization. We talk internally all the time about being an excellent organization, being a good example of what New Orleans needs, and also what government agencies can do in general. So we are setting the bar high for ourselves, and we're making that a part of our overall strategic vision and action plan. Next slide. So we have 4 core service areas that have been developed in this new business model. That's sustainable housing, which is focused on the home ownership. sustainable development, which is focused on providing resources to affordable housing developers, resilient infrastructure, which has some overlap with housing, but in general, we're providing resources to other governmental agencies, institutions to create resiliency on their physical properties. And resilient innovation, it's all about staying ahead. We want to make sure we're always investing in that next best idea, that next best concept. We don't want to be behind, we want to be ahead. And in many cases, we want to set the example for the private sector. And we're doing that right now with some of our programs. The Green Mortgage Program is an example where we're trying to bring ideas to the private sector in hopes that they make an investment in the same type of product or program. So that's very realistic for us. It's something that's happening right now, but these are our four focus areas. Next slide. And our business model, everything that we do, all of our revenue, the products, it's a direct reflection of those four core service areas. And we can produce elements like green mortgages, mortgage revenue bonds, tax exemptions, green infrastructure bonds, green building loans, and the list goes on. We're consolidating our program roadmap to make sure that we're not all over the place, but that we're fully leveraging what we can do as a public agency. And then again, working with those capital providers and other capital investors like mortgage investors, muni bond investors, and impact investors. It's going to take a network of people, organizations, and opportunity in order for our model to work. And we've already started developing pieces of it, especially with the sustainable home ownership and the sustainable development department. Next slide. And here are the opportunities that are created: energy efficiency, the acquisition of and rehab of 1 to 4 unit homes, hurricane resistant roofing, green infrastructure, affordable and sustainable rental housing that has the elements of green infrastructure and solar that are built into it. And then also battery storage, so that when Ida comes up again, we're able to maintain power in our communities and have the technological solution that will allow us to function during that disruption. Rain barrels and gardens, just other aspects of green infrastructure. So this is a snapshot of one neighborhood, but these are the things that we can do across the city with our programming. Next slide. Next slide. The impacts that we're looking for, we've talked about these on an ongoing basis, but we're going to be counting. There's going to be a scoreboard. There is a scoreboard, and it's already on, but we're looking for affordable and sustainable housing production, green job creation. Somebody has to go out and put all that new technology on those houses. That's a chance for us to create jobs in our community. Stormwater mitigation. Let's measure how we're actually capturing stormwater and better protecting the neighborhoods and utilizing nature. Community awareness and action, providing programming, opportunities, better marketing. I went to a community event this weekend that the city put on, and the community was very clear that they want to hear from us. So we're going to turn up the heat in terms of our marketing efforts, or just outreach overall. Green technology deployment, that's innovation. This new model actually brings in the private sector even more. It brings startups into our model. It brings other types of innovative developers into our model and gives them an opportunity to create these sustainability outcomes and a reduction in CO2 emissions, which is a mainstay of many resiliency plans. But by us deploying community solar and other types of renewable energy, it'll help us to reduce CO2 and produce cleaner energy. Next slide. So what's the impact on our financials? Where have we come from and where are we going? In 2016, we started out, in terms of starting out, I mean, going in this new direction as it relates to a sustainable business model. We started out with 33 million in financial and program assets. We're projecting by the end of 2021, considering the projects that we just approved, that we'll have 150 million in program assets, program and financial assets. So that's a really good start. But next slide, there's a long way to go. As I said, we've set our sights high for this organization and the type of impact that we can create. So by 2031, we want to see our financial and program assets reach the $1 billion mark. And that's going to be a direct reflection of money that we put into the community. Byron's going to get into this a little later in terms of the specifics of how do we get there, where do we start, and what do those numbers look like? What are the volumes that it's going to take in order to reach that $1 billion community investment goal? But we think it's realistic. And in order to do it, next slide, it's going to take some external capital. So we've been trying to be very conservative with the capital that we have on hand right now and leverage this new vision, leverage our resources so that we can bring in that third-party capital that will help us reach that $1 billion community impact. We think it's going to take roughly 100 million in capital in order to reach that goal. And we're going to spend that capital on program operations, lending reserve, technology modernization, making this a world-class organization, and being able to keep up with the private sector. We probably won't ever, and not probably, we won't ever be as profitable as a private sector organization, but we can be sustainable and we can keep up. We can be a really good partner. So that's the goal of us increasing the investment and making this platform larger. Next slide. The sources of capital, and there are many. We're not just going to get that 100 million from one place, but we're going to use some of our own money. We're asking the city to make an investment. We're going after foundation grants and program related investments, commercial lines of credit and credit enhancements, or CRA investments from our local banks and national banks too. Sustainable housing and infrastructure bonds. The muni bond market is transforming right before our eyes. So the types of bonds that we were issuing before, we may do some of those, but a lot of these bonds are going to be new, and we're engaging the market in a much different way. And then the National Green Bank and Clean Energy Accelerator. The Clean Energy Accelerator has been included in President Biden's Build Back Better framework to the tune of about 29 billion. So that's 29 billion for that network of green banks, which we're a part of. So the expectation is that we're going to get a substantial injection of capital in order to realize our vision. Next slide. And a few milestones that are coming up that the team is going to get more into. Naz, I'm going to wrap up now. I know I'm over my time, but we've already closed our first green mortgage. We're working on upgrading that program so that we can scale it better across the community. We're expecting to go back into the bond market, the multifamily bond market for the first time in a long time this year with the Christopher Holmes project. And we're expecting that to be the first of many bond issues to come through the platform. We're going to host some investor events toward the end of this year and going into next year so that we can realize that $100 million investment that we talked about. We're going to be expanding green mortgage options for homeowners and developers, namely a renovation option that we think is going to make our volume reach all-time levels, at least as an organization. And then we want to start closing out on the first phase of funding for that $100 million plan early next year. And then we want to roll out our resilient infrastructure and innovation pipeline of projects. So that's the third leg of our, or at least the third and fourth legs of our new business model. And we have the pipeline. We need to start putting the structure in place and getting those deals, those early deals into motion. And we expect to have some movement on that going into the second half of next year. So that's it for me. I am going to turn it over back to Naj so she can introduce the team who is going to take you through the different areas of our plan that I just went through and the specifics of how we're going to accomplish it. Thank you.
Thank you, Damon, for a wonderful presentation. Some snaps for Damon. Thank you. I know you went over time. In the interest of time, we think that another presentation is priority over the other executive staff members. So Byron Badger is now going to present. If you'll give me 1 second, I will pull up his presentation. 1 second. Okay, here. Now, All right, Byron, you're up. Thank you.
I'm up. Thank you, Naj. And good afternoon, board members. Thank you for your time today. Today we will take another look at our draft budget for FY22, as well as long-term projections as Damon laid out. We're not approving the budget today. This is just a review. You'll definitely have a chance to look at the budget again at the next board meeting. And then we will be set up for adoption and approval in the December meeting. So today we'll just run through the preliminary numbers, since there has been some small changes from the last review. We'll also take a look at some staffing needs, which is something that was requested at the last board meeting. Then we'll also look at, as I mentioned, the long-term projections, which is something that was requested in the finance and investment meeting, to help identify at what point, in time, do we eventually kind of break even from scaling up these programs. So now, as you can advance to the next slide. So, as mentioned before, the goal going into this year's budget is to make sure that we're linking the budget to the strategic plan, linking it to our initiatives, linking it to our goals. We know this is going to help set the foundation for making prudent decisions. We want to make sure we're aligned as an organization. We want to make sure we have the ability to enhance our communication and our clarification of roles and responsibilities, and just overall accountability. One of the other goals going into this budget season is to make sure we focus on doing more with less, while we're trying to, still make an investment in ourselves and try to bring in low cost capital to support our operations and offset our reserves, until we can scale up. So a conservative approach was taken this year. So looking at the FY22 budget overall, the preliminary budget is set at 2.2 million. This is approximately 100,000 less than last year's budget. Our total revenues are budgeted at 803,000, which is just about double what we budgeted for in FY21. And we're actually slated to exceed that budget slightly this year. So, but next year, going into next year's budget, we're looking at almost double in terms of revenue. So you can see we're starting to scale up, and most of that is tied to the Sustainable Development Program that we got off the ground. Our allocation for reserves this year is 1.4. That is 27% less, so 506,000 less than we budgeted last year, which is 1.8. So we're moving in the right direction there. And then overall expenses are down by 5% in this budget pass. Next slide. So this takes a look or step into our revenue assumptions for the budget next year. You'll see a small amount of that revenue is related to other income, which is interest income, which is tied to our cash accounts and interest that's on our cash accounts. We have 68,000 in single family origination fees. That's slated from a budgeted or projected 60 green mortgage originations on the single family side. Then we have 139,000 in conduit issuer fees, which consist of roughly 83,000 in closing fee income, as well as 56,000 annual fee income. And that includes projecting the closing of this year's bond, conduit bond issuance, as well as 3 for next year. And then the majority of the revenue is going to come from our pilot transactions, which we're expecting to close at least 7 transactions next year. 500,000 of that being in closing fees, and then the remaining 90,000 will be from the annual pickup of income that we receive. So overall, 803, as I mentioned, 401,000 increase versus last year. Next slide. So this is on the expense side. This excludes salaries and benefits. There's really no major changes from the last iteration that we looked at. Overall, there's a reduction in most categories, as mentioned. There is an increase in the capital expenditures line. As we know, we want to make an investment in enterprise technology, become more agile, enhance our manual processes, which will allow us to maximize our internal and external interactions and reporting. So that is one line that was increased for this budget iteration. The remaining were reduced, and like I said, there's no change from the view that you saw last month. Next slide.
Byron.
Yes, sir.
It's Wade. Quick question. This slide, so it does not include salaries, which usually is the biggest expense, right? Is there anything else? Is there anything else of note that this carve out?
No. I think as mentioned, a lot of the expense lines, the assumption was based on experience and where we are expected to end this year, as well as some of the budgeted dollars that we had in some line items for last year that we've already started expensing. I've reduced that this year.
Fair enough.
Same.
Thanks.
All right. So this next slide looks at our salaries and benefits line. It also shows our the head count for each quarter. So our salaries and benefits is slated at 1.3 for the budget for next year, which is unchanged from the previous year. But as we know, and as Damon mentioned in his presentation, we definitely need more talent to be able to execute on this model, this new business model, and to be able to keep up with managing our ongoing pipeline and our initiatives. So our goal has been to aggressively seek grant and low-cost funding that'll help support adding staff and helping with startup expenses for green banking as well as technology. So this shows our, you can see a trend of actual of where, where on a quarterly basis where our salaries and benefits expenses lie. And that dark gray line just shows it as being flat going into next year. The stripe line is that piece that would be supported by grants. And so you'll see there's a kind of a layering in of positions there. We're starting at 13, we're layering in first, second quarter, some positions, and then on a back end, we're layering in some positions on a back end. So it's not a full blown out, influx of hiring. It's basically we're layering it in, and it's going to be supported by, the grant funding that we go after and achieving our goals throughout the year. So next slide. So this is our current org chart. This does have our new positions as well as our vacant positions that we've had that we basically put on hold for this year. We have that included as well. Our top priority right now, of course, is the Sustainable Home Ownership and Development Program. So, the priority would lie in the programs area. And, I mentioned in that previous slide, layering in positions in that first and second quarter, that will be slated to the programs area. And then there's also a vacant finance director position as well as compliance officer. And then a business intelligence analyst that, as mentioned in that, that layering in that fourth quarter, that will be slated for those positions. And of course, once again, supported by funding, grant funding. Next slide. So this shows This takes a look at our base budget, basically what I just went through in that first column, but it also shows a forecast of a best case scenario as well as a worst case scenario. The best case includes the additional positions that I spoke about. It also includes a capital contribution of $1 million and that grant funding. It still includes a small injection of reserves from F&O, but of course not as much, right? It's we're slated for 1.4, but if we get that grant injection, that will come down to 400,000 for the year. And of course, as we move on, and we'll see in the next slide, that will reduce as we move on. But ideally, this best case and worst case scenario, the bulk of it is tied to the capital contribution, but there's also some adjustments in the assumptions on our originations, on our single family mortgages, as well as our pilots and our conduit issuances, moving that up or down. That would affect our revenue, to adjust those numbers. Next slide. All right, and so this shows our long-term revenue and net income projections. The assumptions and the tie-ins here are tied to our strategic plan. So there are the assumptions of the single-family green mortgage loans starting at 60 originations next year and scaling up to 150, and over the 10-year period, roughly 1,500 originations. We also have pilot transactions here, the 7 that we have slated for next year, scaling up to 12, leading into 2031. Then we have conduit transactions. We're assuming here, just based on, we don't have a lot of history, but we assume that we'll do about 35% of the pilot transactions. So we're starting at 3 conduit transactions and scaling up. Well, it's scaling up to 4, but it's based on 35% of the pilot transactions. And keep in mind, this is a very conservative projection. This does not include a lot of the other services that we intend to deploy. This is strictly just active services that we have right now. And so with that, and with this also includes a $10 million injection that we will spread out over the years. And as Damon mentioned, it's a much larger amount. So this is strictly just one component of the capital that we need, a small piece, which is that for the operational needs. And so that 10 million is in here. And so with that, we're slated to a break even in 2016, as you can see here from the graph.
2026.
2026, I'm sorry. 2026.
So, and I'm sorry about this, guys. I thought we were going to do questions at the end for everybody. But Byron, if what I don't see on here is the assets piece, where we are with the reserve, how much of the reserves do we have left?
Oh, so in terms of the total cash reserves or just the
Total cash reserves, yeah. What do we have on hand?
Yeah, so it's not on here, but the total cash right now is roughly 9.8 million. So that's total. And if you go back now,
And where is that in here? On which document?
I don't have a projection of the actual cash on here. I don't have the cash. I just have the actual reserves that we have stated for the budget, but not the total. Not the total cash.
So can we get that for the financial pieces for the presentation? Because I think it's important to go along with this to look at how we think our reserves are going to be managed.
Yeah, and so you can look at this particular slide here at the bottom. That net income, we know this is, of course, this is based on the capital contribution or grant, but that negative net income would be, we would have to supply or balance the budget from our reserves. So, as I mentioned, ideally, next year it would be roughly 400,000, and then it would go down gradually. But in 2023, because of the increase in positions, you see a slight lift of about 600,000 that we would have to come out of reserves, and then it scales down. And then once again, this does not show all of this is just simply the active products and services that we have right now. But I can, show a cash reserve, a kind of a projection.
Yeah, I mean, those revenues are, I mean, the best case scenario is both of these requires, even the best case scenario requires still a significant investment from the cash reserves. And that we're still reliant on the cash reserves is something that we're concerned about. But I want to make sure that everybody is paying attention to that. We are making decisions, and we've been fairly consistent with this over the last few years as we've had to rely on the reserves as we make this investment. But I do think it's important that we see all of this with that context, with the reserves going up, and also that's got to be a part of the conversation. So we can start talking about that conversation when we get to break even. Are we going to start investing in our reserves? I am all but certain that as this organization grows and expands and takes on more financial positions, they're going to want a reserve that is being grown. More and more of these initiatives are going to want to see that.
Right. And I can provide in the next iteration show that. But just I know you mentioned the best case scenario shows an increase in reserve. It actually shows a decrease.
Not an increase, a reliance.
Gotcha.
Not an increase, yeah, no, that even in the best case scenario, we are relying on some reserve dollars. And what my point was is that it's not an insignificant amount of reserve dollars. I believe you said it was about $400,000. That is not an insignificant amount of a $10 million reserve. That is a good chunk of it.
Understand. All right, and just any other questions or comments before I move to this next slide? Yeah, the last slide is really just a recap of the last year's budget versus the base budget, and the differences from $1 to a percentage difference. But outside of that, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Byron, so much for your presentation. And give 2 snaps for Byron, please, for putting this together. Are there any questions so far? And
then I did want to. I think I'm going to wait until we get into the individual departments to talk about the personnel pieces. I did have one question for Damon and Byron, because we are talking about finance now, and so there are 2 finance positions on here: the analyst and the director. And I couldn't tell, and so that's going to be the other thing, is that are we going to look at the budget and say this is what we're doing for? We're going to put I know you guys have you got it by quarter. So is it? Is it like that for everything? So like we heard mention earlier that the budget was almost identical to this year's budget. Does that include the projection of new staff? Because I saw 3 different numbers for the budget.
Yeah, the budget does not include the budget that we're looking to get approved does not include the addition of staff. It's flat.
At any point, like not even like I said, I saw you guys had a quarterly estimate. So, okay. So if.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was that quarterly estimate was to show the layering in of positions, but those positions are supported by grants that we get.
Right, but still, that's still an increase. I mean, it's still going to be additional money. It'll be money coming in to cover it, and more money going out, but more money coming in to cover it. That's fine. I still just want to. That's still going to require, if you add those personnel, that's going to require a budget amendment unless we include them in some form or fashion in this budget, right? Because that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, it would include a budget amendment, and that was something Damon and I talked about, was just being able to come back to the board once we if this funding comes in, to go back to the board with an amendment for that. Right. And that's why we wanted to present it, ahead of time in advance.
Yep. Let people know what's coming and what's and where the staff is going to go, what they're going to be doing, and how they're critical to continuing the mission and continuing the expansion.
That's correct.
And also,
okay, and I'll talk to Kelly about hers when I get to it. She gets to it. And I would assume the analyst position is going to help with how the market is changing. Victor did a great job walking us through it, but the financial market is volatile is not the right word, but it's becoming quite complicated, especially with all of these investments in infrastructure, all these different opportunities that Finance New Orleans is going to be able to take advantage of. But we've also still got to be able to keep our eye on the market trends, because just because these programs and these tools are available does not mean that we can deploy them effectively.
Yeah, and you also that's good points, and is also the fact that we in this with this new blockchain and cloud-based and all this data from all these different applications that has to be managed and effectively, and it's constantly changing, like you say. So that business intelligence position is kind of a hodgepodge of a finance, accounting, and liaison between finance and the programs, right? And kind of this centralized reporting area to make sure we can manage this data effectively.
Great, thank you, Byron. That was all I had.
And one more thing to add to the conversation as it relates to, the staff. There are changes being made to the business model. Well, I showed you a business model, and then Byron showed you an org chart. Well, what we've tried to do is base that org chart on the business model. And we've been learning about some of the things that we're going to have to do as an organization to officially become a green bank. For example, the funding that's going to flow through the Clean Energy Accelerator down to local and state green banks, there will be requirements around it, organizational requirements. So we're going to need to make adjustments to our org model, our business model, in order to fit those. So it's fluid, and I'm just letting you know that it's fluid, and there will be adjustments that we're making going into next year.
Yeah, and like I said, but this is the kind of reporting that I want to be able to see. I think it's something that the board has been very clear about, is that we are with you all and prepared to support you all through this very changeable time, so that this organization can meet the needs of the citizens of New Orleans first and foremost. That is what you all are trying to do. But we want to make sure that the board is prepared for that fluidity as well, and so that like this presentation with the different scenarios. That's exactly what we're looking for. And again, so no one can say we didn't know about it. And again, we just ask questions now. What are you talking about? Who are the positions? And even if you guys hire for a position that isn't on this presentation because something happens, again, recognizing that what we're going to be looking for is this level of thoughtfulness, like a forecasting, just saying this is what's coming in, this is where it's going to be paid for. And not just because it's paid for, we do want to see the overall impact, because as the organization grows, we've got to make sure you guys have everything you need to support that undergirding. It's not just new staff, it's equipment, it's, you know, this is going to impact your space. And at one point, we're going to talk about the building again. At some point, that will come back around. And so as long as we are prepared, we can make sure that, you know, that we're doing our due diligence and are ready.
Yeah, one other thing, Ms. Moore, is I want to make sure, you know, going forward or at the start of the year that I incorporate a monthly forecast. So you'll be able to see that and have that forward looking instead of, you know, being once or twice a year, but on a monthly basis, because it's very fluid and it's going to change. So just look forward to getting that added to the financial report.
And Naj, I'm sorry, I know you're about to move on, but last point to the board and on those projections that Byron showed, he mentioned that they are conservative. Still got to do the work to even achieve conservative numbers, but we actually think we can do better than the numbers that we showed you, because we've been sizing the market. Our consultants have been helping us, Victor, Quantified Ventures. They've been helping us figure out how big this market is going to be and how much of it we can actually serve. So in the past, I showed you a slide in my presentation where we looked at how much investment we've made in New Orleans over time. Well, back in the 90s, when we were really consistent, upwards of 400 mortgages in a year. So we think we can do those types of numbers again, even exceed those types of numbers, because the product that we have now actually serves more of New Orleans and should yield a higher volume of activity. So we're going to be mindful about just being conservative, because we got to manage those reserves and just manage where we at this given point in time. However, we do think the impact can be much greater than the conservative projections. So the team is going to talk more in detail about how we get to accomplish that type of value. Thank you, Naj.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Byron, for that presentation, Andronika, for your questions and guidance. We're going to be moving on now into the various executive departments. First up is myself. I'd like to just give you an overview of goals that I will be working on this year that are very high level. One of those goals is to amend our work products of F&O, specifically the handbook. Our handbook was revised in 2011. It's very thorough. It's a great handbook, but of course, many changes have occurred since 2011 in the work sector. So we will be implementing other clauses in our handbook that cover accountability, that address where we need to be as an organization with our employees. Secondly, I'm going to be working with
Naj, can I interrupt really quickly?
Sure.
Quick question. So with regard to those efforts, what have you all thought through as far as the mechanism for bringing about those changes? In other words, is there a committee, or I'm just curious?
What we're doing is we're keeping mostly all of the material from the 2011 handbook. There are some clauses that aren't in our handbook currently, like we want to add the mission statement. We want to add, the overview of the handbook. We want to add the whistleblower status. We want to add, I'm just thinking off the top of my head.
Right.
We need to put the org chart in there. And let me see briefly, I can run through this and just kind of give you some insight as exactly what
I mean,
those.
the only reason I'm bringing this up is like, I'm guessing Jade would have to be looped in just to make sure we touch
Yeah, I
bases on.
haven't identified yet who I'm going to be calling on.
Okay.
It depends on it. But the
Yeah.
highlighted here that I'm sharing is all of the clauses we'd like to incorporate.
Okay.
One is the welcome to the organization, the handbook overview, the mission statement, the org chart. There's an annual ethics requirement. And a lot of this stuff is embedded in our current handbook. It just needs to be moved around and more needs to be implemented.
Okay.
We have a pre-employment employment process, an at-will employment.
But some is substantive, some of it is style. Yeah. Okay.
Hold on, let me show you what I'm looking at.
Fair
And
enough.
this will help you kind of understand what I did.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Can you see that?
And,
That's the new.
and you know,
table.
I'm not, yeah, and I'm not even sure, like, yeah. And I'm not even sure, like, if you go far enough back to this handbook, I don't even know who approved it. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't duly approved. I'm just wondering, you may give some thought as far as like, is it just Damon that approves it? Is it that goes to the board? I have no idea. So just, you don't have to resolve that now. I'm
This
just
goes
flagging
to the
that.
board for approval.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, fair enough.
It was drafted by, looks like a board member, and I want to say is it Gary Clark?
No.
But in any respect, we need to make sure that all of our work compliance products are up to date. We need to be able to hold the staff accountable. We don't want to create stuff as we go. We want to have a robust handbook that covers just about everything. There was, like, currently we don't have a nepotism clause. We don't have romantic and sexual relationships in the workplace. There are some things that cover that, but there's not an actual clause. Religious accommodations aren't included.
Yeah.
Whistleblower, verification of employment. And then we have under professionalism, we want to incorporate each job description, updating what is already in the 2011 handbook, because some of those job descriptions are outdated. And then just on the employee side and professionalism side, there's punctuality, there's dress attire, employee conduct. And even though there's a employment personnel professional evaluation tool, we have the self-reflection now, in addition to the self-evaluation tool. And it talks about it in the handbook, but it doesn't specifically outline a tool. So we have actually moved the paper tool to a paperless tool to give our leaders more control over basically handling the responses from the employee self-reflection. So there are a number of things that need to be in here. And as my plan is through this year is, as I develop these either policies or statements, I will first get with Jade and just make sure that we capture the law. And then if you don't mind, Wade, I'd like to also, reach out to you for your guidance as well on certain policies.
But by all means, I mean, some of this is definitely spot on labor law, which I'm definitely not a labor lawyer, but there's other areas that I can provide help and assistance, and I'll flag it if I know it's outside my zone.
Definitely.
This is a big project.
I know, that's one of my goals.
Okay.
Yeah.
I admire you.
Yeah. Secondly, we have outdated personnel and authorized, I want to say empowered authorized signatories at the board level on accounts. Some of the members listed are no longer with our organization. We need to get that up to date. And so what I understand from doing some research with Jade and Deidre, that it's a blanket resolution, but it's a very, very comprehensive process. We would basically be going through each account and making sure we have the old members off and the new members on. So that's also going to be a heavy lift that I'll be working with Byron and our legal counsel to get that up to date. And when we're ready to come back to you with the proposals, we'll have it ready for you at a board meeting. The next heavy lift for the chief of staff, which is a huge goal and I'm actually excited about, is executing a process to return to 618 Barone. So far, we have been told what our insurance net check is going to be. It nearly scratches the surface. But as we go into unpacking exactly all the damaged areas, where we would like to see improvements, what we would like to bring in, our kind of wish list to make this a state-of-the-art type of office. We want to embody a green ethos, just to kind of be a companion to our green mortgage program and to what we're putting out in the community. So this is the Chief of Staff's FY 21-22 goals coming in. Any questions? No questions, hearing none.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I couldn't get to the unmute piece. So when is it fair to say that the 2021-22 goals, well, I'm more focused on the 21 goal, I should say. I mean the 22 goal. So the 22 goal is really to execute a return or to execute a plan to return?
No, we're planning to try to be in that building by June.
Of 2022, okay.
Yes, ma'am. Our lease will
Okay.
be up here. And so I'm going to be literally working diligently most of my time into renovating that space. And so I have already a Gantt chart and, deadlines and things like that. But this is going to be a project that's going to be a heavy lift. I'm actually excited about it.
Right. Yeah, no. And you mentioned, so that's something that we're going to be talking about. That is not something that's included currently in the budget either.
That's right.
So that'll require, board approval once you guys get proposals together.
Yes.
Because this was a source of concern before the pandemic and before the move, because there were real structural problems.
Yes.
And watching what is happening with, and I'd love to get an update, and we can maybe talk about this at the full board meeting or a program committee or something, to talk about the state of the building with, now that Virgin has left it, did they do what we hope they could do with helping to making some of the plumbing problems accessible? That was a big problem, and things that couldn't happen while staff were actually in the building. We had hoped that team would, while they were using the building as a staging area, that they could, and that they were going to do some assessments for us as a part of their lease agreement. So I'd love to get an update on what happened with all of that, and how that is impacting your,
Actually, I've already done research on that. I've explored the lease. The lease says that Broadmoor was to advise us of any renovations and any changes. What I understand, and in my debrief with Broadmoor, as we exchanged the keys over to back to F&O, was that they only resolved a plumbing issue. The building currently sits in its same state, and just imagine 2 years more of depreciation and decline in the structure, and so it's going to be like going back in it where you left it.
Well, but if they fixed the plumbing issue, that was significant.
Yeah, that was significant because it was I understand the toilets kept backing up and everything.
Yeah,
but I don't know to what degree. I do know he sent me the quote or the estimate or the pricing information that they paid to get that done. I do have that. I have a number of vendors, because I understand this project was also supposed to be taken on like some time ago, and it just didn't happen because of COVID and everything. But definitely, yes. What we've netted, and I won't disclose on this meeting, I'll disclose in our board meeting if you wish, or programs. What we netted was roughly around $10,000 with a $70,000 deductible.
This was the insurance.
Yes, the total claim came up to like $90,000 plus depreciation, and then another depreciation, and then with the deductible, so we roughly have $10,000. And the way we envision remodeling this this work site is to provide a state-of-the-art conference room that can be rented, as well as, utilized by the public and other agencies, because it will be one of, on my research, it will be one of the largest conference rooms in that vicinity. So like our conference room would be bigger than Bruno and Bruno's, which is also on Barone Street. And I believe it's at Channel 6 on Aretha, Loyola and Channel 6. So it's gonna take some work and it's gonna take some money if we want to bring this building back to be basically an example to the community of what we can do, right? And how we can improve, how we can adopt that green ethos and embed it in the community moving forward. So I would love, Andronika, to like just have some one-off conversations with you about certain approaches I'd like to take, and just get your guidance on that and see how you feel about it, and that sort of thing before moving forward. So you'll be like my thought partner, if you don't mind.
No, don't mind at all. Don't mind at all.
All right. Are there any other questions?
I would like to just second what Andronika was saying, because there were water leaks, and then the plumbing issues really got to it was a pretty serious tipping point, and out of fairness to the kind of staff and visitors. I mean, I think it's excellent that you're planning all these enhancements, which is great, but keep your eye on the ball too with regard to some of these really basic needs.
Well, it's one of the things, like, we can't go in until the roof is repaired, right? So the roof's been leaking is probably as long as the building has been existing. I don't know. But what I can tell you is that there are a couple of objectives, right, that we have to face. One is there are no fiber optics under the ground. So how does that support our IT infrastructure? Second, we have basically a roof that is in horrible condition. So we wouldn't be able to put anything in there, do anything until we got that replaced. It's a flat roof. There's a lower, there's a higher. So that's another thing. So I'm actually going through each office, each door, each everything to see what we need to do to bring this space up to be a model in that area. For our residents, when they come in, our partners, our stakeholders, and anybody who wants to use that space. So that's where I am now.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, next we're going to hear from our program director, Kelly Schmidt. I'm going to present her summary right here.
Can you hear me, everyone?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time today. Bringing everyone up to speed, programs operations have started the process of ensuring we meet the needs of the community with new and innovative programs. And this also includes improved internal processes and ensuring that we have our controls in place with little risk or no risk to the organization. So recently we've launched the Green Mortgage Program. We also has started a cross-training program of the internal team, and this is to improve the experience for not only our developers, but our future homeowners also. We're formalizing workflow documentation to include detailed process flows and procedure manuals. This is also a benefit and a tool that is used for cross-training. I've strengthened the strategic partnerships with key stakeholders. And we're formalizing a framework around program development and implementation for future programs to ensure successful launches. So this is a very exciting time for program operations. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of training going on with the team, and it's all about improving our customer service with our first-time home buyers, existing home buyers, and our developers, and making their experience streamlined, efficient, and just an overall better experience than we've had historically. So we're looking forward to the future and digging really, really deep to improve our internal processes. Any questions for me specific to what's going on in operations?
I'm sorry, Kelly, one more thing. Please update the board on the expansion of the Green Mortgage Program, what we're doing with Eustis. We're still going to come to the full board with some information, but let's at least introduce what we're working on there.
So we're collaborating with Eustis Mortgage Company on a renovation program. We're really excited about this. We're hoping to have this rolled out prior to the end of the year. We're finalizing some terms, marketing, etc. We did have a slight speed bump with Eustis on some personnel issues, but that has resolved, and we're starting to huddle up again to get this launched. But this is a great opportunity for our citizens to do minor renovations on their homes, whether it's a new purchase or an existing. And these minor renovations can also include energy efficiency improvement. So we're staying with our vision and mission on sustainability and resiliency. So we're really excited about this collaboration, and we're really excited about this program. And you should get more information and start to hear a lot about that in the upcoming weeks. Any other questions?
Hey, Kelly, can you just touch on and I know Ms. Morris she said she was gonna wait till your presentation. I may be getting ahead of this, but can you touch on the two positions that, that was slated in the org chart? And how
Sure.
How that's going to improve, the programs area?
Sure. So the key factors of increasing a staff is really about alignment. It's utilizing our current staff strengths into new roles and bringing in new people for new responsibilities. And why I say that is the organization historically was very siloed, working on specific programs. And talking with other green banks, I think we should really start to align like a green bank, like the mortgage industry as a whole. And a few advantages to that is dividing and conquering by new business, relationship management, documentation specialists, QA checks, and post-closing. And this also is going to make for a better experience for our customers. Right now, we had very minimal cross-training, and ultimately, if someone was on vacation, called in sick, program stopped. And that is something that we don't want to see in the future as we anticipate the increase in volume. So we want everyone aligned with roles, but also aware of responsibilities on each and every program. So we're improving collaboration with these new roles. We're covering some compliance. And we're covering an overall flow and a speed of flow versus what we have today. We do not want any stop gaps. Again, it's all about looking at it from a customer's perspective and how we ensure things keep moving. And this will improve closing times, less risk and gaps with controls, less compliance issues, and overall closing those first-time homeowners or closing these loans or these development projects earlier than what we have seen in the past. And of course, volume is a key component here. If we're not staffed appropriately as our volume increases, the only individual that suffers is our customers, and that's what we want to avoid.
So do we have an org chart? I think this would be one thing that would be helpful is to talk about where the expanded positions are. I remember seeing it on the other org chart inside of the earlier presentation, but now that we're talking about this, how many people are currently in the program department? And, I think that will help kind of contextualize and where the additions are to increase capacity.
So Byron included a potential org chart within his presentation that showed the two program operations positions, post-closing, and documentation specialists that we would use. Post-closing would include customer service and anything that happens or rolls outside of once that account closes. So that would include, titles, that would include following up with homeowners if we need any releases, pilot program monitoring process, because that's a post-closing function. And then the volume for our documentation specialist is to have the skill set to know the documents that are required to keep the programs moving. And of course, with the anticipated volume, it may be a significant amount for one individual to handle. And we can go into more, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. So
I was going to say, we can go in more details regarding roles and responsibilities and program ops. In the future, I'd like to see a little bit more.
Yeah, I'd like to see a little bit more detail, and also making sure that when you talk about cross-training, because cross-training of team, there still seems to be some, what you're describing are individual positions who have the ability to handle volume, but there's also, I still have some concerns about, is that still deep enough? Like, is there, especially when you're talking about post-closing monitoring, Finance New Orleans has a very large soft second inventory that needs to be monitored. That is something that probably should be spread out across other administrative functions, not just isolated inside of one department, because I don't think it's not highly complicated work. It's a volume game, but it's also something that has to be done routinely, and having one post-closing doc person or a post-closing person and a documents reviewer, and then they can kind of trade off on each other, I think still doesn't quite get you where you need to be with the siloing. It might be something that, frankly, all the departments are helping with. And I'm not talking about your pilots or anything like that. I'm just talking about the soft seconds for one. But yeah, so just hearing more about what y'all's thoughts are about, like, again, really silo busting inside the organization, looking at who has the skills, because again, your soft second customers will call and get the front desk ostensibly. So can that person help with that? Or do they need to be transferred to someone else this is their little bailiwick? And also, could it be a systems issue, a software issue, where if someone wants to just check on their payout and the person that they call who answers the phone can give them that information, can they find that online, right? And so thinking about it in those different ways to make sure, because I'm hearing two very, very specific positions, and that's my worry about that. But like I said, we're going to support you guys as y'all get what you need. Just want to make sure that you're going far enough.
No, I totally understand and love to hear more feedback on that. When I say silo, is what I see today is one person doing single and one person doing multi, and the individual doing multi is doing all the paperwork and still doing all the follow-up. And when I take those silos out, when I'm looking at documentation specialists, I'm looking through the lens of a larger organization, those two documentation specialists can handle the documentation for both single family and multifamily. So we're breaking those silos up. Whereas our post-closer is more, from historically what I've seen, is answering a lot of questions, doing a lot of follow-up. They can handle a larger volume because a lot of what they do can be spread out over time. They're not bombarded with a single volume every day. And again, we can definitely go in more details on how I see that panning out in programs.
And Kelly, just one quick question. So again, who do you have in your department right now? How many people? You don't have to give me names. Just
currently I have
names and
3.
titles and numbers.
Okay. I have 3.
Okay, including yourself.
4, including myself. Sorry.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Kelly,
and what are the? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was
Nope, I heard another voice.
Yeah, I was just saying to name the titles of the people in your department.
Yep, thank you.
No problem.
Oh, so currently, between the three, they're program specialists in customer service. And I want to kind of realign those titles and tie them to more specific responsibilities.
Gotcha.
I think it's important we use and utilize the strengths of the individuals we have today in the correct roles.
Gotcha.
Any other questions? And Ms. Morris, I'll get something together for programs that we can talk about the org chart and more details into responsibilities.
And I just realized that I owe you an email for something too that you sent me like a week and a half ago. So I'm gonna try to get it to you before meeting on Wednesday.
Thank you.
And last thing,
Thank you, everyone.
thank you, Kelly. Last thing to the board as it relates to programs. Kelly is focused on our sustainable housing operations. So really our HFA side, our Housing Finance Agency side, which we have been for the last 40 years. And now that we are growing a new component of ourselves, which is our green banking side, that's going to be more focused on infrastructure and renewable energy, et cetera. There's going to be some overlap, but there's going to be some separation in how those two worlds work. So what Kelly is focused on is the housing side of it, and it's going to be a model for how we develop the resilient infrastructure side of the house. Mashika is going to talk a lot about that now because she's an innovation and creating those things that don't exist today. But I just want y'all to be aware for programs that
How it works.
we'll have to build another department, if you will, but this is a opportunity for us to get the model right.
Gotcha. And I'm glad you mentioned this, Damon, because I did have one more question for you and Kelly about the housing function and the green mortgage product. So we talked about the closings. I understand that under the green mortgage product, we have options. And I do want to make sure that we are being careful to make a distinction between what is an FHA product with green features, that is a traditional sale to a buyer and that they are given the survey and things like that, as opposed to what I think a lot of people think of as a green mortgage, which is that front loaded process that makes sure that the buyer goes into that home or that investment is made and that home is energy efficient. And those are two different things, right? And so you haven't closed one of the latter yet, or have you? Where it's, that the part of the capitalization included improvements to the home to make it more energy efficient.
No, we have not closed a loan that fits that category yet. The program that Kelly mentioned earlier that has the renovation feature built into it. As we launch that program, we think we're going to have more volume in that category that you just named.
Right, exactly. And there's a need for it. I think there's going to be an opportunity with IDA rehab. Certainly in the last 18 months, we've recognized that there are a lot of people with substandard properties, and we need to, if we're going to redefine resilience, make sure that folks are making investments that are energy efficient, as well as giving these folks access to capital that they are not able to get in the traditional capital markets because those products aren't available. But like I said, I want to make sure that we are, and again, I know you guys have worked hard moving forward so that every housing loan that moves through you guys now has some green feature in it. But it is, I want to make sure people's expectations are being managed correctly, and that we haven't quite gotten yet to the one where, Finance New Orleans helped someone buy either a blighted property or a property that was okay, or they've refinanced their home and made it energy efficient and therefore sustainable for the long run.
Yes.
But we're going to get there.
Yep. We understand too. We understand the concern. As a matter of fact, I went to the city's neighborhood engagement event this weekend and was on a panel with Margiana from OCD and Brenda from Nora and Yvette from Hano. And we had a chance to explain to members of the community the plans we've been working on collectively, some of the accomplishments that we've had. And, you know, overall, they're excited about what we want to do, but at the same time, they're frustrated and they want answers now. They want to see us make some improvements today. So the Green Mortgage Program, the very basic version that's up and running now, it's the free version. If we were a website, it'd be that free version. So, you know, it's there to get people signed up and get them in the door, but we're trying to sell the premium product because that's where the impact is. So when we go into the committee meeting for programs this month, we'll talk more about that program upgrade because there are some documents that have to be signed. There's some new parties that are being brought in. So we'll dig into the impacts of that particular program. But the community wants this now. So we want to get this going before the end of the year. And also, in addition to that energy component, wind and water. You know, so this new product we think can help us address wind, energy, and water as it relates to resiliency. Also, just freshening up the home, making it more modern in the bathroom or the kitchen. And then this program, Kelly, we're still working on the details, I know, but we're hoping we can go up to 4 units with this program. So someone can come in and buy a fourplex or a multi-unit property, which is really important in New Orleans and important to the people of New Orleans. And it's a chance to help with the wealth creation process of home ownership. So this next iteration of the Green Mortgage has more. It's going to offer the community more, but we have some steps to go before it's available. But that's what we're excited about, and that's where we're going to judge a lot of that new volume that's going to come in that we expressed earlier.
Thank you, Damon, Andronika, for all your guidance. Are there any more questions to the program's executive summary? If not, I'd like to have Mashika Baptiste go ahead and present the Resilient Innovation Summary. Mashika?
Hi, good afternoon. So one of the things that we started focusing on was how to make New Orleans a more resilient city. And as Damon brought out in his presentation, we started working with C40 cities, started putting this framework together to coordinate the mobilization of the public and private sector capital. So through that framework came the Resilient New Orleans Finance Plan that we talked about, that you approved earlier this year. And now it's more of the implementation of that plan. So as you know, we've been working with 14 other public agencies throughout New Orleans. We've been green mapping a pipeline of projects that are contributing positively to environmental objectives. This is in order for us to help investors and banks and ourselves identify those green assets in order to direct capital flows to more sustainable investment opportunities. This green mapping project started a couple of weeks ago after Ida. We wanted to kind of pivot a little bit, and we wanted everyone to understand what we were looking for from each agency. And so each agency has given us 2 to 4 projects that they're either working on now or working on in the future that we can partner with them to make their projects more resilient. And then how do we help those projects become funded? One of the ones, then you'll see in the slide deck that will be sent to you, is the RTA Transit Center, which is a $24 million project that we're working on right now with them to help them get funded in the grant stage and then go into a longer term partnership with Finance New Orleans and RTA. And those are the type of things that we're looking for as we're mapping these projects and having the pipeline throughout the Resilient New Orleans Working Group. Also, we've put together a framework of what innovation and research and development looks like. Through research and development, we continue to develop new market opportunities for future green investments. We're constantly looking to understand potential opportunities and develop programs that will deliver impactful benefits to the community. This framework is a 7-step process. You'll also see that in the slide deck that starts with the very beginning, defining the problem, and then going all the way to implementation, and then measuring against the goals that were set for the city, their climate goals. So everything is in that framework, and that's how we are building our innovation and our research and development. Last but not least, resilient innovation. We're looking to start an accelerator in 2022. We've done some informal work with startups in the community that are looking to solve a problem or are socially impactful, and they fall into one of the sectors that are outlined in the Resilient New Orleans Finance Plan, such as energy generation, storage, energy efficiency, green buildings, clean transportation, sustainable waste, water management, adaptation, and resilience. So if they fall into those sectors and go through other steps in the process that we're outlining, we'll be working with them to provide such things as technical assistance, funding, and each one has different needs. As I've been informally working with different projects, we've definitely seen that they've gone all the way from the beginning where they just really need help just getting it started, or they're in a stage now where they need to be funded to grow even bigger so that they can impact the community. We'll also give mentoring and connection with potential customers, partners, and other resources. So we're looking to start that in 2022. This accelerator will have 5 different companies that are here in the community, and they would last a year. So all of these initiatives that we're talking about today is what we're currently working on the innovation side, the resilient innovation side, so that we can reach our goal by 2031 that Damon had spoke about earlier of that $1 billion investment in the community.
Mashika, do you all have any, what's going to be the process for identifying the target areas? I mean, I see you say 7-step process, but
we have a stepwise approach that has all the target areas. It's outlined. I will send it in the slide deck. All of that is already outlined as the framework of what that approach is and how we're going to get there. We did a mapping project with C40 and the working group, maybe about in October, that outlined the entire process of how this works. And we actually took the real project that we're working on right now with RTA and went through it step by step, identifying all those sectors, any barriers, what we can do to help get the project implemented and off the ground, and then also thought partnering. And so that's the way that we are approaching these projects. And so it will be in the slide deck that the entire approach, and I know we were up against time today, so this is more of a summary, but we've done this approach with the working group. I think we spent like 1.5 hours, 2 hours with them going step by step on what this looks like and how we're all working together to get these things implemented and off the ground, and then how we measure them to make sure that they are going against the climate, we're reaching the goals. And if we're not, what type of other projects do we need to work on or to make sure that we're reaching those climate goals that are outlined in Resilient New Orleans Finance Plan.
Right. So, but I'm also wondering too, is how are you all connecting to other initiatives that are out there? For example, we're the only green bank in the state. There is the governor's climate change task force, which will be putting out recommendations soon, and making sure that Finance New Orleans is able to support some of those. I heard you mention transit. I also hope that as you're going through sectors, that housing is a sector, because there are, again, when you start talking about the green mortgages, one of the challenges that we have had in this market with implementing everything from permeable pavements to HVAC, Energy Star HVACs, has been a capacity of business partners, of contractors. And that's been, and raters, right? There's only a couple people who do all of this. And I know you guys are working with Green Coast around some of this, but I just want to make sure. And I know we talked about this before, Naj and Damon, that we would exercise some privilege if we couldn't get through everything. And this is definitely an area I'd like to talk about at the program committee meeting. If not the one this month, definitely the one in December, and dig down around that and hear a little bit more from where you guys are going with this, and then making sure that if there are any other connections, particularly connections we can assist with. I'm on the subcommittee for land use and housing, and to make sure, and I've mentioned, and Fano's been mentioned. I want to make sure everything is
that committee we're actually invited to. Is that the one that starts this Friday, I believe?
I don't think we have a committee meeting this week, but that's, I think, yeah, no, but they, so that's for the strategic, for the strategies for diverse housing opportunities. That's not the state, that's CPCs, that's CPC, it's not even CPCs, because it's the mayor's Office of Economic and Community Development Committee. This is the governor's task force that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, like I said, y'all have been mentioned inside of that space, but just making sure that there are all of these different opportunities. And I know we've made some introductions, like with the Alliance for Affordable Energy and Gulf Partners for Law and Policy, and just making sure that those people know about you all and know. And some of them I'm introduced to Kelly and Damon and Mashika. I just got to get straight about making sure that you're getting connected as well.
Yes, I would love any introductions that could be made, because, we're going to have to partner with a lot of different groups and areas, so that this could go as well as we projected to do. So you and I, we can talk offline, and any information you can give me or any introductions, that would be great as we continue to map this entire thing out. But that's going to be instrumental to us being able to move these things forward.
Great.
So what we'll do is we'll slate under the board meeting for November 22nd. Under the executive report, we'll ask for, we'll go ahead and slate some time for innovation as well, if that helps out, so that we can unpack this further.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Are there any more questions for Mashika? All right, in the interest of time, we are now moving on to our Director of Community Engagement. Jarvis, take it away.
Good afternoon, board members. I will try to make this brief and give as much details as humanly possible in the interest of time. So as you all know, I'm Jarvis Lowe's, I'm Director of Community Engagement. And since joining the organization in March, a lot of time I've spent divided between really three courses of action, which have been to assess, to plan, and then to implement. How do we get the biggest impact on our community to get the work done that we desire to do? So a lot of that's building relationships with people within the community who could access our mortgage offerings, building relationships with developers who would also construct those housing options, and then also building strategic partnerships with government partners and other organizations. So for that, where we've been, I'll do kind of a where we've been versus where we're going transition in the work that we've done. So the things that I focused on over the last couple of months have been the website, branding, marketing, and content, and then outreach. So for the website, we've done a lot of page revamps. So a lot of that stuff we were able to bring in-house through the help of working with Elizabeth, myself, and an intern we had for a couple of months, Juan. Through that work, we went and we assessed every single page that existed on the website and looked at things we needed to add and how we could grow to make sure that our audience was getting served as best as humanly possible. So if you take the chance to visit the website, you'll see a lot of things that have new information, updated graphics. We updated a lot of the communications pages so that people know who the staff is. That's also one of the things that we're doing going forward, is expanding that to add direct contact links to the staff members so we can so people can access those folks directly and not have to go through a cyclical loop of contact opportunities. The next thing we did was looked at some of the branding and marketing and content to solidify making sure people were actually getting that. So that means better utilizing our social media channels, again, better utilizing the website, make sure this information is readily available so folks don't have to go searching far and wide or make a ton of phone calls or send emails back and forward. Most of that stuff is now at people's fingertips. In addition to that, we started developing a number of one-pagers where we took all of this information, put it into these quick snapshots that we could share across social media platforms, as well as with people when we go out, hopefully soon, to different community fairs and different events that will be giving this information out. And then the last piece that we put a lot of time into was creating this video marketing program. And the intent of that program is multi-pronged. One, we're taking all of our information, we're condensing it into these 2 to 3 minute videos that can be shared far and wide via e-blast, via text message, and on social media. We're coupling those with social media graphics and memes that we can use to share that information out, and really just taking a kind of a expedited approach to get as much information out to people as possible. And then the last piece that we have is the stakeholder engagement. We've taken some time as an executive staff, as well as with the entirety of the staff, looking at who are the folks that we need to be engaging, how often we need to engage those folks, and we're setting a calendar that we're going to aggressively pursue going into 2022 to make sure we're keeping good engagements up with our individual stakeholders, and ensuring that we not only have a means and mechanism to get information out to people, but also have a means and mechanism to get information back into us. And we're actively redefining what those relationships are and how we can be important to those relationships and how those relationships are important to us. I know I said a mouthful. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I had a couple of quick questions. Thank you for that, Jarvis. One of the things that I noticed on the website was that the old soft second program isn't on here. That's still being managed and monitored. We kind of highlighted that as an area where that could be something that people could do online if that could help. Is there any, because we do have the down payment and closing cost assistance program, but we don't have the old program on here. And it all talks about the green mortgage program, which those buyers are going to know that that's not them. And so just making sure that while we are talking about the things that we are doing moving forward, that the programs that we still have to manage that don't fit neatly under the new headlines are still noted.
Got it. I will make a note with that, and Kelly and I'll sit down and discuss what's the best way to make sure the information is continued to be displayed on the website, although they are shifting and changing.
And let me jump in right here, Jarvis, to add that we have the Green Mortgage Program. Of course, that's the main program that we're operating, but it's actually the only program that's operating, at least on the mortgage side. So even if someone isn't ready for the high level upgrades, a solar panel or new roof, windows, or some kind of renovation to the home, they're still coming through the Green Mortgage Program. Because
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the old soft second program that we're still managing. That they would not, I closed the mortgage with Fano 7 years ago. I would not click on, nor would the Green Mortgage Program be where I want to know what my buyout is. I want to know what my payoff is. I want to know, am I still in good standing? That's what I'm talking about. There are hundreds of those people, if not a couple thousand.
Yeah, I understand that part too. And I was getting there, which is
okay.
All I was going to say was that we have this new program, and that's where, what you rightfully pointed out, the information is concentrated. The older program that you referenced is actually beginning to sunset. So we do need to have a deeper conversation about what kind of investment we want to make in putting information on on the site, but there's a chance for us to at least put some basic information, as you pointed out. So we'll deal with that internally.
And also, I mean, I think also just one question about all of the work that Jarvis has to do here. Obviously, he's going to have to use consultants and because you don't have staff, right, Jarvis?
So actually, the bulk of this work has actually been done between myself and Elizabeth and an intern we had for a couple of months by the name of Juan. So a lot of it's been bridged out. There's some technical things that we will have a consultant that we use for, but that's going to be the consultant that we've been using in-house. We've mapped out what the cost of that is, so we were able to pretty well outline what we think the budget will be for that.
Yeah, I also would like us to think about seeing the budgets for these departments by departments, right? Figuring out, so that we can see how, particularly with something like this, people don't understand how impactful this kind of work can be. And on everything from, again, this is how people know about the programs and just understanding the investment. So again, if you all do need to ask for additional dollars, that we understand how much and how little in some instances we are actually spending on these kinds of initiatives when there is a request, and also to highlight how effective they're being and how judicious everybody is being with the dollars that they have.
Yeah, Ms. Morris, that's one of the exercises.
Just to kind of give you a note, to slip in your back pocket for now. We had a great meeting with our web vendor on Friday, actually, and we are taking a different approach. We are going to learn our website internally because we don't have what you would call like a website graphic artist or someone that is specialized in that area. So what the team is going to do is we are going to learn our website. Our consultant has offered a minimum price for training. I think it's like $200. But what it will do is it will give us some controls to where we could make these on-spot changes without having to go to a consultant. And with that consultant, what we did was, in looking at 2022, in fact, from our meeting, we've told them that we are amending their agreement just because where we were then, which was like 2019, I think, and where we are now, the scope has been, it doesn't need to be as broad. We know exactly what we need. We have a system and a process to getting things on the website, but we're taking the initiative. If we can do it, we're going to do it in-house. That's the approach that I'd like the team to take. And then we've also learned that our host, our vendor, has a bunch of options for us if we need assistance on the back end. That's way cheaper than them starting the initial program or whatever we ask them, the tax action item, to closing it. It gives us more control. So I just wanted to give you, I don't want to go all over, but just to give you that information as well. That is one of our approaches with our budget for next year, is reducing the amount that we expend to consultants. Because a lot of this stuff we can do in-house, we just have to learn it. So.
Yeah, that's what I figured. And just, but I think it's also worthwhile to see that. And again, if there is a need, to grow, to expand it, then right. It's easy enough to say, well, this is how much, and frankly, I think it's going to show how little we're spending on this. These are the bangs we're getting for the buck, and this is the limit of the staff. Yeah. And this is why we need to increase an investment there.
Yes, ma'am.
And one more point to add, a piece of feedback that was received during the community event this weekend was that the community was pretty adamant about wanting to hear from us. They said they want the information. They said text them, email them, send them videos. So our approach, as Jarvis just laid out, is going to be multi-pronged, but this is going to be operating all day long. You know, imagine Finance New Orleans having its own TV channel via all of these media outlets. So there's always going to be something going on, some piece of information going out. It may be repetitive at times, but that's fine. Give people a chance.
Yeah, and that's what I was, the point that I'm glad to hear that there's some of that you can build capacity internally, again, across multiple folks. You got Elizabeth and Jarvis, and there may be some other people who can help with some of this, but and some of it you may need to do the approach that y'all are talking about with your website designer, where they come in and they teach you all how to do some of this stuff. They set you up, you know, and there may be services that you can use to help with things. And like I said, my concern is like, this is an area that I personally and professionally have a great deal of respect for. And I know it's an area that we tend to do, which y'all are doing, and rightfully so. You got to be judicious with the funding. But like I said, when you all reach the limits of the internal staff and with consultants, I want us to be able to look at how you have been really thoughtful about the investments, so that when you're ready to ask for something else, we have a history we can look at and say, yeah, they haven't been wasting a whole lot of money on websites, and they haven't been changing the logo every 2 years or whatever. This is what's been doing, this has been the results, and now we've got to next level it.
Yes, ma'am.
Received. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Morris. Are there any other questions? Hearing none, thank you.
So board members, this concludes our board retreat meeting. I am going to try to get all of the slides that were shared today to you guys by the end of the week, just so that you have them, you can refer back to them. We can also use them as just a guide for conversation pieces or discussion items throughout the year. And we will also be providing updates to our goals. And like I said, a bunch of us will probably be reaching out to utilize you guys as thought partners because you have great guidance. So yeah, are there any questions before we adjourn? Hearing none, I really appreciate everybody's time. I know this was very long, but we can't do this work without you guys. We value you tremendously. And I hope that we continue to meet or exceed the bar, right? That's what our goal is. So thank you very much.
But thank you guys. This has been great.
We'll see you Wednesday.
And yeah.
All right. Thanks,
Chair
everybody.
Thank you all. Have a
Thank
great
you
day.
guys.
Take
All right.
care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.